know her best as a playwright, lyricist, author, television, theater, and music producer, along with being an Emmy Award winner. I'm so honored to present Eileen Bluestone Sherman as my guest on My World with Stories podcast.
How do you do, Brooke? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you for having me.
So, how did you get started to where you are today?
Well, first, let me say that I am a playwright and I'm a lyricist and I'm a young adult author and I've been a television writer and I'm also a producer and I'm also a professor of dramatic literature. So all of those things had different beginnings, okay? But if you want to go all the way back, I was a theater major in college. I always loved theater. I did a lot of children's theater when I was in school, in elementary school and junior high school and high school. In fact, I got a couple of like citywide awards for my children's theater. So I loved it. And of course, I wanted to go to college and study theater. And I only wanted to be basically in the New York theater world and the Broadway theater world. Those were always my dreams. I think from everything I know about you, those may be your dreams as well. Anyway, so what happened is I did study theater, but I at the same time, simultaneously, while I was in high school and college, I had a boyfriend who I grew to love very much. And so 5 days out of my college graduation, and he was now in medical school, I decided I did not want to stay in New York. I'd rather get married. And we went to go and live. He was at Albany Medical School, which is in Albany, New York. So I went to be there. But at that time, I really missed school. I missed the theater world. And so I got my master's thinking in theater, thinking that one day, well, if nothing else, maybe I could teach at the college level. So, but I just did it. I did not have any kind of program, like plan. I did not know exactly what I was going to do. And let me say, at that moment in time, I did not even think about becoming a writer. I was only thinking about, I did a little directing, but mostly performing and certainly musical theater. And I loved singing and dancing. But what happened is that now 3 years later, when we might have then said, okay, we're going to go back to New York, I decided then, and my husband was agreeable, that we should start a family. I got pregnant with my first child, my daughter, Jenny, and I decided that, well, I'm not going to be able to be pregnant and go audition for too many roles. So we then went to Connecticut for my husband's residency. From there, from the residency, we decided to have an adventure. And I was pregnant with my second child, my son, Joshua. And we decided to have an adventure because we had never lived anywhere but on the Northeast. And we decided to go to the Midwest. My husband had an opportunity. Now, I've told you this whole story because it was most unexpected, in the least unexpected place. And that's what I always have taught my children. The best things happen in the unexpected moments, in the most unexpected moments. Well, we went to Kansas City, and about 6 weeks after I had given birth to my son, Joshua, I was reading, and the major paper there is the Kansas City Star. And I was reading the paper, and there was a little blip about a new children's theater that was having auditions. And I thought, this is perfect, because children's theater, as we all know, and it's for schools and kids, it's during the daytime, it's not during the nighttime. And I thought, well, I can get a babysitter in the afternoon, in the morning for rehearsal, and it would only be for 6 weeks. And I would also get to meet the theater community, but then I'd be home at night and I'd be, available for my family. So I went to audition, and the children's theater was, and I'm sure you've heard of them, it was sponsored and founded by Hallmark Cards. You've heard of Hallmark Cards, right? And they have a wonderful, and they had just built it when we got there. They had a wonderful center for restaurants and shopping and the arts and living apartments. And I went there, and I did not know anybody in Kansas City, and I certainly didn't know anybody from the theater community. But I went there and I auditioned with something that I had written. And it was two women who were the new directors. They had just graduated themselves from their master's program at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And they said to me, they loved what I had written. They said, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "I wrote it." And they said, "Would you like to write for us?" And that's how I became a playwright, because one thing I knew from the moment that I graduated college, always say yes. Always say, sure, I can do that. I can do this. Even if you're not quite sure how to do it, find out how to do it. And in the theater world, very important. Sure, I can do that. Okay. So what was the bigger surprise, though, is that for the first musical, they partnered me with another fella that they were already working with, a composer. And I had never studied lyric writing, and I'd never studied playwriting, but I had an idea of writing. And I had actually, in my master's program, which I hadn't realized while I was taking my master's program, because it was much more academic than it was technical in performance, but one of the courses was the history of criticism. And through learning, through studying formal criticism through the centuries and from all over the world, I learned a lot about play structure, but I didn't even know that I was learning that until I had to sit down and write a play. And the lyrics, I had memorized Broadway lyrics from the time I was 5 years old. I knew every musical that was during, and then that was called the golden age of the musicals. And I knew them all, and I used to sing and dance all of them. So what happened is that I wrote this first musical, and I realized in watching it, now by that point, my son is 2, my daughter is 5, so it's perfect for me to be writing children's theater. But what I realized is that what I love about the theater, and what I love always about books and about television, what I love, it's always the same thing. I love the storytelling. It's not that I needed to be up there to perform. I loved being able to create the story. So I learned a great deal about myself. It was quite a circular journey, as they would say. But there you go. So that's how I began. And then what happened is how I got into books and then into television is that the second play that, or maybe it was I think it was the second play that we were doing. I then hooked up, I said, my sister is she's a composer. She had created a recording studio, but she lived in Los Angeles. And I said, but would you mind if we partnered on this one? And they said no. And so we wrote a second play, and my sister and I I wrote my second play for the Hallmark's Children's Theater. But at the same time, somebody was in the audience, and she came up to me and she said, "I really love your writing, and I am going to be producing a series for local television about all the Jewish holidays. And the first holiday is going to be Hanukkah. Would you not tell the story of the history of Hanukkah, but would you write, a creative new story?" And I thought of my dad's true life story, and we'll get back to that, but that's how I created a title called The Odd Potato, which took me into so many avenues of the arts. But in trying to get that published, okay, I also I had worked on this play, and in this play, one of the characters does not speak English, only Russian. And so I had to make the acquaintance, and I made the acquaintance. She was a young gal who had just graduated Kansas University, and she herself had been a Russian immigrant. And so she knew she'd come here when she was 12 years old. When I met her, she was 22, but she had just graduated right like a few weeks before I met her. And she helped me with the play. But then I started asking her about her life in trying to get out of what was then called the Soviet Union. And she was telling me that it was a life and death kind of situation for Jewish families. And she started telling me the whole story. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, it sounds like a thriller, an adventure story. And I said, I've never read this anywhere, all the details that she told me. And I said, if I could get somebody to be interested in this as a young adult novel, would you help me? And she said, of course. So out of the second play that I did for Hallmark came first a picture book, The Odd Potato, that we should get back to because a lot more came out of that one, but also my first young adult novel, which led to two more young adult novels. So that's how I just one thing led to the other.
What is like your process like when you write a play or like a book? Like, what's your process like on that?
Well, I think that the very first thing that has to happen, and as I said, it's always the storytelling. It is true, when you're writing a play, that's different than writing a musical.
Yeah.
And when you're writing a play, that's different than writing a young adult novel. And when you're writing a play for the stage, that's different than writing for television. Okay. But the first thing that has to happen is that you got to think about a story. A story has got to grab you in your own imagination. And the most important thing in all stories, I don't care what the medium is, in all stories, it's got to have heightened conflict. It's got to have a problem that is not easily solvable. It's got to have a problem that really makes you think, well, how would I do that? Because that's the truth about life. Life is not a cinch. Life has its problems and sometimes those problems can take years to resolve, to figure out. Sometimes they're never even solved. And so that is basically, I think of what is the problem, and that becomes my theme. And why is that important to me? And there's always a personal, when they say writers only write what they know, obviously, I did not grow up in Russia. I never had, or the Soviet Union. I never had that experience of trying to leave and be first to be persecuted and then try to escape. But I understand what that problem means, what that is. So it's not that a writer has to live the story. Every story is not autobiographical, but you have to understand, and you've got to have the empathy, and you've got to understand the characters. And also what's really important is that you got to figure out who your lead character is. And that character, while you want that character to be to have really many wonderful qualities, you also have to make that character a little bit flawed, because again, that's who we all are. If you give to your audience somebody that's perfect in a perfect world with perfect clothes and perfect hairdo and perfect grades, whatever, nobody cares. They say, oh, okay, that's nice. I'm happy for her, but what we want to do is, because what I find when I'm watching really great theater, reading great theater, and teaching great theater, okay, when I'm doing those, I'm learning about myself and how to face the world and how to help people that I love. And so that is really why I love theater so much. In fact, I tell all my students, and many of them are graduate students, I tell them in college, I say, I said, yes, you know, these plays, some of them can even be off the wall, the way they're written, they're crazy. And you think, I don't know this environment, I don't know these people. But the truth is, really good plays, and every good plays, you learn your best philosophies about life in drama, you know, without them being, you know, the word didactic, without them kind of hitting you over the head. This is the lesson. It should never be like that. The lesson comes out of the storytelling of the plot and how it all goes. And plus, you want your audience never to quite know how it's all going to end. You know, even if they know, oh, she'll come out okay, but you don't know how it's going to come out okay. And that's true about life. You know, if you have a very optimistic viewpoint of life, you always say, this must come out okay, this will come out okay, but you're never quite sure until you actually make that journey and you go through an awful lot of steps and maybe an awful lot of heartaches, how it's all going to come out. So
you worked with your sister, and you know, did a lot of stuff together. What's it like working with another family member that kind of like?
That's a good question, a very good question. So I am actually the middle of three daughters. Okay. So my older sister is the composer, and my younger sister that we don't work with, but she also was very talented. So I grew up in a household that it's not like, I grew up like falling in love with theater and musical theater, particularly like by the time I'm 4 and 5 years old, listening to the records my parents would bring. Now vinyl is very hot again, but I grew up with vinyl and with the albums and looking at all the pictures from the Broadway shows. But it wasn't like we had so much money that we could just go see a show all the time. I was lucky if I went to see one Broadway show a year. That would be my big gift. And I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Now, if you know your Monopoly board, you know the game Monopoly, right? I grew up on Atlantic Avenue, one of the yellow squares. Okay, so, but we lived in a big old house, and it was very important to my father, and it was like, and to my mother, that music be part of our education. It had nothing to do, they weren't expecting us to go necessarily become professionals in the arts, but they thought it was a really, really important tool for just part of our education to get to know. And they both loved music, and they both loved Broadway music. And so they would bring, even if they again, they didn't get to go see every show that came out, but if they did go to see a musical, they would bring home the vinyl, and they also bring home the sheet music, okay, the piano music. Now, there is a difference of like learning how to play, which I can play the piano, and being a gifted musician. My sister Gail, my older sister, was born with this special gift. The way I knew from the time I was 4 or 5 that I wanted to be part of the theater world. I didn't know I was going to be a writer, but basically be part of that and on stage. My sister knew from the time she was 4, 5, and 6, she only wanted to play the piano. This is what she knew. And so she was very, very gifted in that way. So we would have, and my mother knew every lyric from every Broadway show. I mean, she had a great memory. She had been a brilliant student, and she loved, I get a lot of my love for language from my mother, and she loved to write. And so she would learn those lyrics 1, 2, 3, and she knew all the lyrics from growing up from her mother and her aunt. And I mean, it was like she just knew this instinctively. But she did not have a great voice. But my father, she did not have a great voice, but my father had a fabulous voice. Okay, but my mother was a good actress. That's what I'm saying. It was like the combination. My father had a magnificent voice, and he loved to sing. And so we would have what we called family concerts. But then all our friends, as we were growing up, they would come too. And my sister was always at the piano. She was playing, I was singing, I was dancing. And my younger sister had a terrific voice, just like my father. So she also was singing. She actually had a better voice than I did. And so she was always singing. And so a lot of my sister, my older sister, and I, we kind of, without being formally trained, we grew up with all these Broadway composers that, I mean, the older ones, obviously, the Gershwins, George Gershwin was no longer alive, Ira was alive, but we grew up with all these other composers that we knew that we were just learning it by not thinking about it or studying it, but just loving their work and understanding their styles. We just instinctively understood what their styles were. So what happened is that when I asked my sister, would you work, and now remember, I'm living in Kansas City at the time, and she's living in Los Angeles. And this is not the time of the internet, now, and I have colleagues, they work, they put down the tracks, they mix everything. You can be, one musician can be in Australia, one can be in South Africa, one can be in Holland. I mean, and they put it all together, okay? But no, not when my sister and I were doing it. We would talk on the telephone. I would write everything out. She would kind of record on basically a tape recorder. She'd send me music. I'd be writing the plays. I'd kind of write a first draft of a lyric, which more or less, and as I said, musicals are different from the plays. In a musical, the song has to drive the plot as well, so that it's not like, oh, we're going to stop and now we're all going to sing a song for you. It's that song has to make sense within the storytelling. So then I would write, and then that would give her an idea of seeing my language of rhythm and of tone and of emotion and who was singing it and what it was supposed to do for that scene. And then we would go back and forth. And we found out sometimes I would just say, in the style of, Harold Arlen, in the style of, that song, like, but from Irving Berlin, think of that kind of song, in the style of Jerry Herman. And we knew what those composers were like, and it just basically naturally evolved. And we still are doing it. That's what we're still doing.
Can you talk about Perfect Picture soundtrack?
Oh, sure. Yes. That is the musical of the legendary artist Norman Rockwell. And at the time, and this all goes back now to and again, it goes in like, things never quite happen. I always say, like, in a linear line like this, things in life never happen like that. That's a good lesson for everybody, no matter whether you're 16 or 96, you have to keep remembering that. Never happens like that. So I was still working we had done the second musical at Hallmark, for the Hallmark Children's Theater. I had my first young adult novel produced, and we had already gotten into television in Chicago, and we can come back to that. But I was taking a trip. One thing, when my husband and I, when he was in medical school and I was getting my master's, and we were living in Albany, just 45 minutes away is the state of Vermont, and we had never been to Vermont. And Vermont, as people who go there, they know it's like a fairy tale land. Now, we did not. He was a medical student. I was a graduate student. We did not have any money at all, so it's not like we could go and wine and dine. We used to do it on a shoestring for an afternoon, but instead of studying that one Saturday afternoon, we would hop in our little VW Beetle, and we would basically go up to Vermont and just looking at the nature and looking at the craft shop and finding a fun coffee shop. And it was wonderful. So we loved Vermont, but of course, when we moved to Kansas City, we weren't near Vermont anymore, so we never saw it. And I can remember that one day and the kids are now maybe 5 and 8. Okay. I said, I don't think Jenny and Josh have ever gone to Vermont. And so we decided to take a family trip, and we took a family trip to Vermont. And on the way, and it is a route, and it's still there, Route 7, there was, and I think it's now since been sold, but there was basically a church that had been converted into a gallery that was all about Norman Rockwell. And what was fascinating is that Norman Rockwell's models, when he lived in Vermont, were all his neighbors. And some of the people, the volunteer, basically like tour guides at this church for the Norman Rockwell exhibit, were his neighbors. They had been like children, and now they're all much older. They're much older than I was at that time. And they're saying, and they're telling me, because that's their mother, that's their grandmother, that's their sister. And I just had this idea, how fabulous to be able to meet these people who were in the pictures. And so I had an idea that I wanted to write my third children's musical about Norman Rockwell. So I went back to the director and I told her about this, and she really loved the idea. And I thought it was, I started writing, but again, I was doing so many other projects because, as I said, I'm now writing for television, and I was a script writer. So I was like, every couple of weeks, something was due. So I didn't really get the full script of the Norman Rockwell musical together. And this director from the theater company, she had gotten another position in Hawaii and she was leaving. And after she had agreed to produce my show, she said, "I'm so sorry, I can't, because I'm leaving and I can't leave other work for the new director. He'll have to decide whether he wants to do it or not." So, that was a grave disappointment. And that's one thing for any of your listeners who are thinking of going into the arts. For every wonderful success story, there's 100 very disappointing stories, so that you've got to be ready. You got to be tough. You've got to be resilient and always have something else ready to do. So what happened is that, but I'm pretty tenacious. I'm stubborn. And I got this idea into my head. I am going to get this show up somewhere. Now, I remembered in Vermont that there was what was called, and I'd never been there, but a venue called the Southern Vermont Art Center, which was about art and music. And I had no idea whether they ever even produced any theater. I didn't know that they had a theater. But I decided I'm going to call them up. And whoever I talk to, I'm going to say, I know Norman Rockwell was very, very involved with the community because he lived there. He raised his children there. I'm working on this musical about him. Who would be a good person to talk to about the musical? And so what happened is I was given a name. And this person, again, in the most unexpected moments, things happen in our lives that change our life. And what happened is that I called up this woman. Her name was, and the man I talked to, again, he was a stranger. He said, "Oh, you want to talk to Pat Carmichael." Well, I did not know that Pat Carmichael had been a major off-Broadway director and Broadway casting director and had worked with all the greats. Okay. I knew nothing about her. I just called her up and said, "Well, I live in Kansas City. I'm a playwright and I'm working on this musical about Norman Rockwell." And I said, "But I love Vermont and I know that he's part of it." And she just said to me, she says, "Well, if you're ever in the neighborhood, come and visit and we can talk about it." So what she did not expect is, because most people would have said, "Oh, she's not really interested. She's just being polite." She didn't know that within a few months, I was in the neighborhood. We were going back to Vermont. And rather than even tell her, I just knocked on her door. I knocked on her door and I said, "I'm here." And she was the greatest playwriting and theater mentor I've ever had. She's the one who really taught me about how to look at theater. You know, I'd written theater before, but she really taught me everything. And she was a brilliant, brilliant director. And the most important thing when you're a playwright is to work with a brilliant director, because they see things in your work that you don't even know are there. And so I was very, very lucky. So what happened is she said, well, why don't we just try putting it up here? We'll have some professionals that are here. We'll have, and see, at the Southern Vermont Arts Center, they had a big barn like theater. And she said, we can just see what happens. So we did put it up. And I learned a lot about, there's a lot of rewriting to do in this play, because that's the life of most plays. It's not like, you write it and let's put it on. You've got to see a lot about it. But what happened is, again, in the interim, I was writing more young adult novels. I was speaking all over the country. Lots of stuff was happening. And then a lot of things happened to my other title, which we'll come back to, The Odd Potato, which I had told you about. So it wasn't until, I guess, I basically got my first experience producing and learning about recording, Broadway musical style albums in 2005. And that was for The Odd Potato. And then there was like an 8-year period where there were a lot of just personal things happening that I really wasn't doing that kind of producing. I just kind of put that on the back burner. But come around 2011, okay, so I guess it was about 6 years, 2011, I said, I'm going to take the music, because I knew we had great music, but I also knew that there were still flaws in what I wanted to do with the script. And I said, I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to start by putting together the score and put a concept album together with the score. I worked with a great arranger, and let's see, and invite some wonderful Broadway people. And I know one of the people that I invited was a friend and your mentor, Beth Lavelle. Okay. And so, and I'm going to learn about the script from the music. And that's exactly what I did. And so we put out this album called Perfect Picture. And that music is like played on the radio all the time. But it also allowed me, and after that, because I had put that out, then not a few years later, because that came out in 2013, in 2016, a series at Lincoln Center called Broadway's Future Songbook, they said, gee, we would like to basically invite you and your sister to be our guest stars for one, evening. And also we would like to see like a more or less an hour version of, and so I put it together with some more other Broadway stars. And so it was very, very interesting. So you see how one thing kind of goes into the other. But I will say that I absolutely adored working with Beth. She was terrific. And when we first met, the first thing she did is she asked me all the questions about who her character was for the song that she was singing. So,
yeah. What's it like also working at like 54 Below and putting out your content?
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's see, what's it like when we were at 54 Below? Well, I've done, let's see, my work has been performed at 54 Below a couple of times by another Tony Award winner who Beth actually knows very well too, Lilias White, in her shows. And it is I will tell you, there's certain thrills as a writer, okay, not necessarily producing, but as a writer, there are certain thrills. And one of the thrills is after you have a book published to go into a bookstore and see that book on the shelf, and you're just there. Or when I produced my audiobook, and then you go all over the internet and there's your audiobook. That's very, very thrilling. But another time, which is so thrilling, is to hear a fabulous Broadway performer live up on stage without telling you that they're going to do it, decide that they want your song to be in their set. And another thrill is when you hear your music on the radio, and especially when you don't know that it's coming on the radio and all of a sudden it's there. So these are thrills, as you know, it's not an award. You don't get $500 million for it, but it is such a really a real high. I mean, it's a real, like a thrill, a satisfaction to say my work is, somebody else thinks my work is good. I think my work is good, but somebody else thinks it's good enough that they want to present it. So that is very, very exciting. So when Lilius put her, and she's done this a couple of times in different venues, not that I did not know that she was doing it. Okay. And I'm just sitting there, and she introduces to me to the audience, and then she sings the song. I mean, it's very, very cool, and it's a lot of fun. But another time was when I actually produced at 54 Below, because most recently, since 2015, I am the co-founder of an international music organization, and that is of Grammy and Emmy, and even now we have some Broadway nominees, Tony nominees in the group, and it's over 2,000, really award-winning artists worldwide in every kind of music. And when the Grammy Awards were in New York, and I'm a Grammy voter, so I get to go to the Grammys, and when they were in New York several years ago, and we wanted our group to kind of come together and have a party, and everybody would get a chance to play. My partner, who is from the world of Americana roots, he did not know about 54 Below. And I said, oh, but you're going to really like this. And I know another gal that you have interviewed, and she did her work there, Mia Maravis, that she also, and I said, and that's how he found out about it, because I said, my partner, Grant Malloy Smith, for the Indie Collaborative, we had to be in town together in New York to interview somebody that was going to kind of become our partner for radio. And so that night, just by chance, Mia was doing her show at 54 Below. And she wasn't performing. She had written, this was basically her show that was being performed by some other Broadway performers. And I said, oh, we've got to go and support Mia. And he says, oh, I've never been there. I said, don't worry, I've got 2 tickets. I said, we're going. Okay. So he walked in there. My partner Grant says, I'd like to perform here. And I just looked at him and I said, well, why don't we have our event here when it's the Grammy weekend? And so not only have I had my music, performed there, but I've produced there. So that's my story with 54 Below.
Let's go back to the Odd Potato.
Oh, the Odd Potato. Okay. The Odd Potato has a continuing life. It just had another very highly successful and high mark in its history just a few weeks ago in December. But I'm going to start all the way back. Okay, so if you recall, my show is being performed at the Hallmark Children's Theater, and afterwards a young mother comes up to me and says, I am producing she basically was doing it for Jewish education. She said, I am producing a series of shows on public access television in Kansas City. My first show is going to be Hanukkah. I love your writing. Would you write an original story, a Hanukkah story? And I have to tell you, said, when you asked me what my process is, usually my process, I can be thinking about a theme and an idea for a couple of years before I even put pen to paper. But for the Odd Potato, I thought of my dad's story. And I have to tell you, I wrote The Odd Potato. It's just 3.5 pages because it became originally a picture book. And again, it was for, telling it I was given maybe 10 minutes. And I think this story takes 8 minutes to read. And it took me 20 minutes to write I just knew this story. It just flowed out of me, just came, never happened like that again in all my years, but that time it did. Okay. So what happened was I went to the television studio in Kansas City. I read the story, and as I'm leaving the television station, somebody said to me, that's a really good story. You should publish it. Well, that's a very easier said than done, suggestion. And in those days, now you can, and via the internet, you can just send your story, whatever you've got out, to 500 people at the same time, and you wait to hear and see if anything's going to happen, and you do it all electronically. Then you had to do it in the mail, and you had to wait one person at a time. And so one publisher at a time. But I had an idea. I thought, I remember in school, when I was in elementary school, not even junior high or high school, but elementary school, in public school, we had what was called the Weekly Reader, which was a newsletter. Okay. And it told you all, current events and social studies, and also crossword puzzles, all kinds of stuff. It was a newsletter. But in Hebrew school, we had something similar called The World Over. Again, a newsletter with current events and then games and all kinds of stuff. And I thought, I'm going to send this to The World Over, because I'm sure they'll be looking every Hanukkah. You look for something original. I'm thinking, okay, so we'll send it. They'll probably pay me $25 if I'm lucky, but then I can call myself a published author. I was a produced playwright, but I was not a published author. So I sent it to The World Over. And this, again, is sometimes you think that maybe angels up in heaven are watching over you. Well, this is one of those moments. So I sent it to The World Over, and I don't know, 6 months, 7 months later, I get the manuscript back. And in it is a form letter that says, thank you very much, but after 44 years, we are closing our doors as publishers. So I thought, I had 44 years and I missed the deadline. And I figured, well, this isn't going to work. And I was just like ready to give up. I thought, what does it matter? And I can still see myself at my kitchen sink, and underneath was where we kept the trash can. And I have the manila envelope in my hand, and I'm just about ready to throw it into the trash bin. And I have no idea why. Don't usually do this, but for some reason I thought, I'm going to look inside. I put my hand again in there. Did I miss something? And when I pulled it out, there was a short little paper, a very one that said "from the desk of," and it was kind of like a stick it kind of thing, and it was one of the editors, and she said, I can't help you. We're closing our doors, but I think your little story has potential. Why don't you try? And she listed 8 publishers, like 8 nights of Hanukkah, 8 publishers. Okay. Now, I knew all 7 of them. The first 7, they were all very, very famous publishers. But the 8th, I did not know. Now, as I said, you had to send it one at a time, and you had to wait for, and so this was like in 1982. So now I have to keep waiting and waiting from one publisher to another. And all of a sudden, I'm down to the last publisher, the only one that I'd never heard of. And I had never heard of them because they were 2 young women who had just started a new publishing company. Okay, so the first 7 said, thank you very much, but no, thank you. And that's what I'm saying. I don't care what aspect of the world of the arts you go into. And I used to keep all my rejection letters to remind me, so that every time something great happened, I would really value how great it was, because it's very hard. All of this is very, very hard. And you just have to be tenacious. You have to be stubborn and tenacious. So we go through 7 of them. Thank you, but no thank you. And I send it out to the 8th one thinking, well, this has probably just been a futile exercise, but I tried. Okay. So what happened is that I send it out, and it is now the afternoon before, in 1983, before, because I can see myself going to the mailbox outside. I just picked up my kids from a preschool and their Montessori school, and we were getting ready for the Jewish holiday because it was the afternoon of the Jewish New Year. And I see in my mailbox one of those manila envelopes. And when the manila envelope came, you knew they were sending back your manuscript. I was very distressed, thinking this is a terrible way to start the new year. Okay. But I was wrong. In it was a letter saying that, and it was a publishing company called Car-Ben Copies. And they had basically named it, they each had a child, and they named it each, one was after Karen, and I think one was after Benjamin. So it was Car-Ben Copies. And so they loved The Odd Potato, and would I allow them to publish it? Of course I would allow them. So it was quite exciting. And when I saw, and then the book came out, and they matched me with an illustrator that they had worked with. And when I saw her illustrations, I hadn't thought about it before, but I had thought about, because the next show, was going to be that following year. And I hadn't thought about it before, but when I saw the illustrations, I'm going, this could make a musical. And I got on the telephone, and I thought, well, Hallmark, this isn't quite right, a Hanukkah musical, they're not going to be interested in that. But I got on the telephone, and I called around to theaters at Jewish community centers all over the country. And that first year, they knew The Odd Potato because that was being sold at their book fairs, and they loved the story. And they said, if you write it, we'll produce it. And so that first year, and my sister and I wrote the first musical of The Odd Potato. But we wrote it thinking, well, you want to, you may have 50 kids at the community center who want to be in a play. So we wrote it for a really, really big kind of extravaganza. And what happened is, then I got involved in television. And in Chicago, Superstation WGN came to my producers, and my sister and I were writing musical scripts for this television series. And they said, WGN came to us and they want to produce a story about Hanukkah. And we know you have The Odd Potato. I had to rewrite it again, because now I was writing it for television, and I rewrote it for a cast of 4. And we did it for television. And then that won the Emmy Award. And after it won the Emmy Award, then I thought, oh, I probably have something here pretty good. I'm going to see what I can do with it in New York. And eventually it became Broadway Sings The Odd Potato. And then after we did that in New York, my director, who is 4-time Tony nominee, Randy Skinner, he is the choreographer of both 42nd Street and White Christmas, and he loved The Odd Potato. And he said, you've got to create a CD. And that's how it became a CD. And I wanted it to have a kind of a hook of why were we doing this, because we tell the whole story. It's got, it has a sound effects. And I thought, but we did it for charity. We did it for Variety, the children's charity of Kansas City. And I thought, we're going to do Tony Award winners sing out for Variety's kids. And I got 20 Tony Award winners on that CD. And that was basically the way I learned about producing music in a recording studio, because took me over a year, and I brought one artist in at a time and worked on that. And so that's the story. But every year something happens to The Odd Potato, either on radio, either winning an award. This past year, not only was the show produced in San Diego, but at Lincoln Center, when my music group, the Indie Collaborative, did their All Faiths production, I brought in a really fabulous violinist, one of our Indie Collaborative members, who is not just a world-class classical violinist who plays with symphonies all over the world, but she also is noted on Broadway for being the concert master for both the last revival of Fiddler on the Roof and of Sunset Boulevard. And so she's this phenomenal violinist. And then I brought in a woman who is a Drama Desk winner and a fabulous Broadway actor herself, called her name is Rachel York. And we put together a very special rendition of My Mother's Menorah. So every year something's happened to the Odd Potato. Oh, that's the story. And it all had to do with it was based on my father's true story. That's it. Based on his true story of what happened to him when he was a little boy during the Depression. So yes. So, and that's what I'm saying when you said, what's your process? Your process is that you've got to have something that is meaningful to you. And again, I didn't live it. My dad lived it, but I understood what it meant. And so, and then I changed it around because I can remember when the book first came out, and I would because I've done lectures all over the country and I would speak to school kids around. And I can remember sitting in a circle with a bunch of kids, and they said, one little girl, or maybe it was a little boy, raised his hand and said, well, if it's about your father, why is the lead in the book a girl's, why is she the one that, and I said, and I looked at him, I said, because I'm a girl. So it's like, and that happens too. Sometimes I'm telling it from a daughter's point of view. So that's it.
When you got nominated for an Emmy, what what was that feeling like?
Well, okay. My work, I only actually have the physical trophy for one, but it actually happened twice and both the works won. Okay. So the first time, when you find out that you're getting nominated for an Emmy, an Emmy award, it's kind of like unreal, really, of course you want it. I called my parents were still alive. I called them, I could, everybody, oh my goodness. And I'm going to the Emmy Awards, but you see, I'm and it's not that I'm a pessimist, I'm very optimistic. But anytime I've ever been in a competition from the time I was very, very young, and I have been in competitions and I've won, but I never go in thinking that I'm going to win because I don't want to be heartbroken. So I go in with the idea, no, it can't happen. It won't happen. So I'm just very excited to be nominated. And it is a great honor. It's a great honor to be nominated, just to get there. When you hear the title of your work named, when you hear it named, I have to say, it's like I hear it, but I don't hear it. I couldn't register it. And my husband is going, you won, and so because you're at a big dinner, this was in Chicago, you're at a big dinner and it's like, wow, and so you don't really register it until after the fact. So it's kind of a very surreal experience. But again, it just reminds me that when I won a major book award, I won the National Jewish Book Award for my first young adult novel. And again, when I was nominated, and I remember he calling and telling me that I was nominated, but we would not know the results yet. And he just told me, he said, good books are nominated, lucky ones win. And that's true in all awards. You should always remember that. If you're nominated, it means your work is good. People thought your work is good. If you win, means, Lady Luck's been smiling on you. So that's that. And you don't always win. It's like, you don't always, the greatest baseball players, and I love baseball, don't always hit a home run. They don't even always hit at get a base hit at bat, and so you just got to be ready. Just keep trying your best. That's it.
What's it like working with like professionals that have like been in the business for a long time, and you're like kind of like the opposite, like the one making the work?
Well, it's really interesting. I think that I think, obviously when people are what they call seasoned professionals, meaning because you do learn. I'm sure whether you talk to Beth or Mia, every time you do a project, you learn so much and you learn from other people. If you're really a student of theater, you're always studying it. You're always looking at it. And you're studying how other people do things. So I have to say that when I'm working and I'm bringing in, and I truly love to bring in people whose work I admire, like that I'm in, not that I'm in awe. I was thinking about this before we were going to actually have this chat, because I was thinking about, some people, they're in awe of the celebrity, oh, you're famous. Oh, you got a Tony Award. Oh, you got a Grammy Award. I'm not in awe of celebrity. I never was, even as a little girl, but I am in awe of great talent. But talent is not enough. You really have to really prepare and study and keep working at that talent and kind of adding more and more layers to what you do. And so when I love bringing in great talent, I feel very honored. I'm actually next weekend, I'm going to be recording. I'm sure you've heard of the Broadway show Jersey Boys. You've heard of that? Well, one of the original Jersey Boys, Christian Hoff, I'm going to be recording he and his wife, who's also in musical theater, in a new project that I'm doing. And I just wrote that I'm saying that I'm very honored to be working that, to have them do my work and to present my work. So I'm always honored, thrilled, and I love to learn. At the same time, it's always very interesting. Sometimes, and I can remember this even in school, you can spot the great talents, 1, 2, 3. They are quick, they are good, they are no nonsense, and they just know how to nail it. And it's always very exciting to see that. And I've seen that with very, very young kids. For instance, now you may not know this name, but you may have watched, although you were pretty young when this series was on. But do you remember there was a television series called The Sopranos? Do you remember that?
I've heard the name.
I'm sure you've heard. You were too young to watch that, but your parents know the name. Okay, The Sopranos. Anyway, and I think they're going to be making a movie of it. But the young girl, okay, who ended up playing the daughter on The Sopranos, and she was 17 when she got that role. The very first time, because I took the Odd Potato to New York City twice. The second time it was Broadway Sings the Odd Potato. But the first time was with my mentor, who I said from Vermont, Pat Carmichael. And I learned so much from her coming to New York and helping me put on this show. We only did it for 4, shows. But just by chance, okay, when we were having auditions, this young girl was in the same building getting a music lesson upstairs. And our casting director saw this young girl and she says, "Oh, you're coming from a vocal? You want to audition for this show?" And she had done shows on Long Island, but she had not done New York City shows yet. Well, just by chance, this young girl, you knew it, right? She was 13. You knew it right away. Her voice, her presence, dancing, she had it. It was right there. And it was very, very exciting. And she was very quick and she was fabulous. And she was the lead of The Odd Potato, was Rachel. And she was my Rachel. Now, out of that, not only did she go into let's see now. And she also did Broadway. At one point she did Beauty and the Beast. But then she went into The Sopranos. Now this is another interesting thing. So when we did the second time Broadway Sings the Odd Potato, our young Rachel was a gal named Molly Ephraim. Now, if you watch the Tim Allen show on television, she became one of the daughters. Like these Rachels, they're very quick. They basically know it. They're not well known. They're not that experienced when I met them, but you know that they've got it. They're ready to go. So, and they're serious about it. And that's the whole deal. They're serious about what they're doing. So, because it's hard, as you know, really putting it, I mean, it's fun. It's very rewarding, but it's hard work. You know, the audience is just supposed to see the fun of it. They're supposed to just be having a great time, but it's hard work. It takes a lot of concentration.
Yeah. Can you talk about the indie
collaborative? Oh, okay. Well, that came out. That's an unexpected story too, and that's a really good story. So what happened is, I'm a member, you know, once I started becoming a producer and as a lyricist, I joined the Recording Academy. Mm-hmm. And through the Recording Academy, online on Facebook, people would kind of reach out to each other from around the world, other, you know, members of the Recording Academy. And then what happened is there were other musicians that weren't members of the Recording Academy, but they lived in New York City. And at that point, from 2013 to 2015, I lived just in New York. Now I live outside New York, but I was in Manhattan. Well, every night I was being invited. Oh, I'm playing at so-and-so club. Will you come see me? And then they would say, oh, I'm playing here. I'm playing there. And it was all kinds of music. Sometimes it was country. Sometimes it was rock. Sometimes it was world music. I mean, it was all kinds of places. I thought it was a lot of fun because I also thought this was fun. I would meet people that I'd been writing to on Facebook and I didn't know, you know, but, you know, after a while I thought, oh my God, I can't keep doing this every single night, you know, and we should have a program where we invite everybody and they kind of get to introduce themselves and introduce their music. So I had this idea. So one of the guys who was on Facebook, okay, his name was Grant Malloy Smith. And Grant is really funny. I mean, funny. He comes up with the funniest posts. I didn't know who he was. I'd never met him. I hadn't even heard his music. You know, it was American Roots I read, but I didn't know anything about him. But he would make me laugh with his posts every day. And he didn't really know me. I mean, you know, it's, you know, Facebook, everybody is involved. Okay. So, but I knew he was also a Grammy voter. And I said, you know, I'm going to the Grammys in LA. Let's try to meet. I'll look for you. Well, the morning before the Grammys, and it's at one of the big Marriott hotels down in downtown LA. And then you meet there in the lobby. Everybody's there in the lobby. And then you kind of basically cross the street and you're at the theater where you need to go because most people don't know, you know about the Grammys in the evening, but before you even get to the Grammys in the evening, they give out about 77 Grammys in the afternoon. And so we all were, and we had a lot of people I knew were nominated for the Grammys. It was very exciting. And so I said, but we'll meet in the morning and, you know, I'll look for you. Well, I said, I'll look for you. My gosh, I would never have found him. But, okay, he, as I said, he's an American Roots. He always wears a cowboy hat, always has a cowboy hat. If he hadn't been wearing that cowboy hat, I would never have found him because, you know, all the women with their sequins and their high heels and you know, everybody's all, you know, dressed to the nines and the men are in tuxedos. he was in a tuxedo, but a cowboy hat. Okay, so I found him. And I went up to him and I said, hi, because we didn't know each other. I said, hi, I'm Eileen, and I've got this idea. I maybe said 2 sentences. He didn't even let me say my idea. He says, I'm in, because he had been thinking about the same idea. He had been traveling he travels the country because he actually performs all over the world. And so he said, I'm in. I think it's a great idea. And he had met so many different performers from every genre. And so what we did is I said, well, if you're in, I said, I know the place I want to do it. I said, but I come from musical theater. Musical theater is on the fringe of the Grammys. After all, musical theater gets their awards and the Tony Awards, and so, but they also do get the Grammys for recording. But it's really the rock, and it's really the pop, and it's really the rap. I mean, it's not, it's not musical theater. So I said, if I do this alone, nobody's going to take this seriously. I said, but they will take it. American roots and country, that's a very big deal. Okay. So I said, they'll take it seriously. So what happened is that I said, I know the exact place where I'd like to do this. I'm a member of an organization called the Drama League, and they had just moved down to Tribeca, and because I had presented my work, but of course for musical theater audiences, I had presented it there. I said, it's a very nice space. It's like a black box. They've got folding chairs. Maybe 40 people will come. That's the room only holds 70, 75 at most. Okay. So we kind of get, on the computer, and we're reaching out to people. We don't know who they are, but we're saying, we're looking to see if you live in the New York area or the Washington, anything close. We even had a couple of people come from Boston, because Mia came and she was living up in New Hampshire then. So we basically, all these people, it was all strangers. It was all strangers to me. Grant knew a few more, but not many more. Okay. And Grant and I had set up folding chairs. And what we were hoping that 35, 40 people would come. We thought we were going to be in big trouble, because the fire code only accepted like 70. We were at 77. Okay. So, we were like packed in there like sardines. And what we did is we went just chair by chair. If you wanted to stand up and introduce yourself and either perform for a couple of minutes, we had a keyboard there. People had brought guitars, they had brought violins, they had brought flutes, whatever you wanted to do, stand up and tell a little bit about genre, about who you are, what you do. Okay, so that's what happened. While this is happening, and remember, this is June 8th, 2015, people in the audience are clicking their cell phones, taking pictures, and they're posting it in real time on Facebook. And while we're doing this, Grant is getting messages, when are you coming to my city? And from there, that we ended up within that next 18 months going to Atlanta, Chicago, Philly, LA twice, San Francisco, Nashville. We were all over the place. And we grew from that first 77 people, we grew to over 2,000. And now, and the whole idea is to meet people and to create these new collaborations. The violinist that I told you about, that is so phenomenal, and so, I mean, a major award winner in the classical, but now Broadway world. That's how I met her that night. And I heard her play, and I went up to her and I said, I don't know how it's ever going to happen. I said, but one day you and I are going to collaborate. So we ended up collaborating on December 8th this year. So that's how it goes. So, and now the Indie Collaborative, we've done Carnegie Hall, we've done Lincoln Center, we've done 54 Below, we've done places out in LA. And in 2023, a year from this summer, we're going international, and we're going to the UK. So that's what's happening. So let's just hope that COVID is behind us. Okay.
Is there like a story that you like, sharing that, with that you really like about your career?
A story, an anecdote, you mean? Okay. Well, I think one of my favorite ones is the odd potato that I looked inside that envelope. I think that is for sure. Let me see if there's I can tell you one. Okay, so I was thinking, now you probably don't know his name, but the first time going back to the Norman Rockwell musical in Perfect Picture. So after we tried it in Vermont and I gave it a little bit of time, a few years, I wanted to do a reading of it in New York City, but I wanted to invite Broadway people to do the reading. Now, one of the people that have you ever seen the musical of 1776? Do you know that musical? You know, it is the musical of the making of the Declaration of Independence. And in fact, there's going to be a revival again. I was just reading about that. So there is going to be a revival coming to Broadway. That was very long ago. Okay. And I and that was the very first time that I ever, with the assistance of my son, who at that time was designing on Broadway and producing, and now he's both produces, but he is also a physician. He does both. Like, he took a little of his mom and a little of his dad. But that was the first time that I ever really worked with a whole Broadway cast, and it was for a reading. One of the gentlemen in it, his name is Ron Holgate. Now, you won't know that name necessarily. Beth will know that name, but you won't know that name. Ron Holgate won the Tony Award for the 1776, and he played one of the colonial representatives from Virginia, and he's from the Lee family, and so he sings a great song. And then they put him in the movie because he was just so great. He's just wonderful. And he's a bigger than life character. Now, I've seen him in other shows since then, but that always sticks out in my mind. Well, if you want to talk about the first time I met him, though, no. And okay. So there's two things that happen. So the first time that we're in the first rehearsal, the first day, we're in rehearsal, and the musical director, and there was like a choral group, and then all the Broadway actors, and they each had their roles and whatever. And he's there, and I'm hearing his voice, and the voice is the voice of, Henry Lee from 1770. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe I have this actor singing my music. I mean, it was like, I was like a little schoolgirl, like just starry-eyed. And it wasn't about celebrity. It was about hearing that voice. But he was a brilliant, brilliant musician. I mean, he really is. He's a brilliant musician, and I'm sure he did lots of opera as well. And he's just reading the music. In other words, he did not come in, study. He didn't have the music beforehand, and he's reading everything well in this song, and he sang and he played an adorable character in the Perfect Picture. This character is no longer there, but I loved him. His name is Uncle Gil. He was really Norman Rockwell's uncle, and a very kind of, I guess, quirky kind of, fellow, brilliant, but silly at the same time. And Norman Rockwell loved him because he always had a surprise for him. And so he plays Uncle Gil, and he sings this song, Curiosity. But there's a note in the writer's note. There's a section, whistle. In other words, just whistle. Okay. Well, no one had given him any direction. Where the song is going, he's singing. I'm thinking, wow, this is fantastic. He's just reading, sight reading the music. And I'm thinking, this is fantastic. And when it comes to whistling, he puts the whistle in. He is the best whistler on Broadway. Okay, hands down. best whistler. And we all cracked up. Everybody cracked up in the room because he says it says whistle. And that was really what a great pro he was. He was reading it all along and just knew what to do. So that's a great little theater story.
Do you have any like advice like for like just being in the business in general?
My advice. Well, the first thing is to let's see, which would be first? The first is, again, as I said, be resilient, be creative. When one door closes, think of another way to get through. I mean, it is real creativity, but it's not always what you know, but who you know. First of all, keep studying. Get as many, if you want to be a performer, in other words, if you want to be up there on stage, you basically get as many skills as you can. You learn to juggle, you learn to roller skate, you learn to play instruments. Okay. I mean, one of the women that I've worked with, and she was in not this latest revival of Company, but the revival before of Company. And she got her role and she got sensational reviews because that was the one that the actors had to play the instruments. And she got her role because she's a world-class violinist herself and pianist. And so she could play. And so I'm just saying that it's really, really important to get as many skills and work on them, languages, accents, do everything that you can and keep studying and keep looking to performers that you admire and study what they do. So that's the first thing. But while you're doing that, network. The whole world is about networking. It's not exactly what you know, but who you know, because the best opportunities are the ones that are offered to you. You know, sometimes you have to be knocking on 1,000,000 doors, but then the opportunity on a roundabout way is going to come knocking to you. So you have to keep it at both ways, and you cannot be scared. My most important advice, you cannot be scared of failure in anything. You cannot be scared of failure. You've got to accept, okay, you got to learn from it. And there's a great song, and I don't know, it's an old fashioned song, but the lyric was written by Dorothy Fields, and she came from her father. Lou Fields was a major Broadway and vaudeville producer. I mean, we're going back to the 20s and 30s, but she wrote in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think her very last show that she wrote the lyrics with Cy Coleman to maybe Seesaw. I may be wrong there, but anyway, but she wrote a song that is like my theme song that basically resonates with me. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. And that is really every time you fail, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. And that's why I never say never. If I have an idea, to figure out, how do I get there? So, and then, as I said, the best things happen in the most unexpected while you're working like the Dickens, because, again, people around you think, oh, it just happened. She's so lucky. None of it happens like that, ever. But because you're working hard, somebody else is watching and kind of finds out about you, and then they need you.
So is there like any like upcoming work that you could share, or
Well, I do. Okay, so I do. As I said, I had just produced, and my work was performed at Lincoln Center, and that was on December 8th, not too long ago, like a month ago. But I have my music group, and again, I'm always the producer. I will be producing, and this will be my second one, at Carnegie Hall. And that's a thrilling thing too. Carnegie Hall is really quite a very heady experience. Doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's quite an experience to produce and to have your music performed. And so I'm not working. And so it's not just that I'm producing, and it will be about 20 of my colleagues who will be doing all kinds of music, but I will be working. Okay. There is a new musical on the boards now about Michael Jackson, and it is called MJ. Have you heard of that one? Have you heard of that yet?
Little probably.
Well, it's in previews. It's in previews, but it opens, I think, the first week of February. I know this because I just went to see it. Well, a colleague of mine that I work with, I mean, the entire ensemble, the dancing is like incredible. It will blow your mind away. It is just incredible. But my colleague is really, truly one of the best dancers on Broadway. And he is going to be with some of the other musicians performing he'll be opening the show, and then he'll be closing act one with two of songs by the Bluestone sisters. So and his name is Ryan Vandenboom. And I'm very, very thrilled to have him doing my work at Carnegie Hall. And as I said, next week, I'm going to be recording a song that actually is an old song for us. It came out of that show, the second musical, but the first one that I worked with with my sister many years ago at Hallmark's Children's Theater. It's a song called "We Talk Without Words," and it has to do with how people that universally that we should all get together. We all share the same problems. Doesn't matter like our lifestyles and where we live and how and what choices we're making, or even our cultures, basically, or our religious traditions. We basically are, essentially the same. I can remember studying in college a sociology class that I was just fascinated with, because it looked at primitive peoples from all over the world. And yet, for somehow, because I guess the human mind goes the same way, they were all coming up with the same traditions. They were expressing it a little differently, but they were all coming up with the same traditions. So "We Talk Without Words" comes from this show where I said that the young boy, and he's being bullied by the new kids. He's at a new school now here in America, and he's like, being, I won't even say bullied, but made fun of, mocked, because he can't speak English. He can only speak Russian. Okay. He just came to America. It's like, if I go to Russia, I don't know Russian. Okay. So, but his father had defected. His father is a great ballet dancer. So this young boy knows dance. The young girl in this classroom, who's the American girl, she loves dance and she studies it seriously. And they make a friendship by dancing without talking. And that's the premise of the song, "We Talk Without Words." And so I have friends who have a wonderful foundation. It is called One Little Finger Global Foundation. And they are putting together a children's album. And it has to do with people coming together and not bullying each other and respecting one another and finding shared experiences and common ground. So they asked my sister and I to please submit a song for this project. They typically work with the United Nations. And so I've asked my, a colleague from Broadway, will and I've got other musicians coming up. So we're putting that all together next Saturday. And then I hope to release it. I love it that he'll be singing it with his wife. They met in the theater. They were on a regional tour in Camelot. They were both the stars, and I love it. And I think it's a song about friendship, a song about love, a song about dance. I mean, it's just great. So that's what I'll be doing. So those are two new projects, plus I personally, right now, I'm working on two new plays. So I'm pretty busy.
Is there any like websites, social medias that like people could follow you on to stay up?
Oh, well, if they want to, let's see. There are two websites that I have. It is EBS Originals, theoddpotato.bookmark.com. Okay, I'll say that again. EBS, and which is Eileen Bluestone Sherman, EBS Originals. And I came up with that name because it's a lot of stuff. It's not just books or plays or songs. It's everything. EBS Originals, theoddpotato.bookmark.com. The other one is ebsoriginals.bookmark.com. And I think that will take you to my whole website about the Violin Players, which was the third young adult novel that I wrote. And I think that my Twitter is at EBS Originals. I think that's my handle. Again, but I'm hoping to put some more stuff together, but follow on the Odd Potato. That's always, there's always something happening there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Well, my pleasure. You asked very, very good questions. Very good questions. I know what that is in preparation, because one of the things I do, I'm also a board member of a foundation, and we do like what we call our salons, where we interview women who've had really very impressive careers. And we do it over Zoom like that, but it takes a lot of preparation. So I thank you very, very much for putting the time in. I appreciate it. Thank you. And keep me posted about everything that you are doing. So,
Thank you so much for listening and watching to My World with Stories podcast. For more info, go to Instagram and Facebook at My World with Stories podcast, and make sure that you give us a like, a subscribe, a follow, whatever you want. Do it, because we love you guys so much, and thanks for being with us.